Someone said, times of mourning displaces us from ordinary life. And this morning I want to talk to you about how suffering and facing insurmountable problems takes us through periods of pain, but ultimately to a new place of understanding about life and have put our trust in God. I grew up in Southern California, and looking back, Huntington Beach, 1982, was as close to being that ideal SoCal as it could get. As a teen, I did not realize how good it was. But looking back, I wish I could say, I wish I knew then what I know now. So almost 330 days of sunshine. Living close to the beach, we never needed AC. Smog, the gentle ocean breeze just wicks away the pollution and makes the air clean. In short, I had it good, but the only downside was that it was Orange County and I lived a sheltered life. So when I encountered the rock band U2 and their album War, I wasn't ready to appreciate their experience nor their art. The first song on the album was called Sunday, Bloody Sunday, and it was about when a British regiment killed 13 unarmed protesters in Derry, Northern Ireland on Sunday, January 30th, 1972. At the time, I didn't know the details, but only had a vague idea that something bad happened between the Catholics and the Protestants. Well, listening to a song about religious ethnic conflict is not my first choice, but I was drawn to the band because many of my friends liked them. And more importantly, they were thought of as a Christian band. Because in the early 80s, I don't know if you remember, there were a lot of pastors going on talk show talking about satanic elements in rock music. And as a young, gullible teen, I didn't want to offend the Lord by listening to some subversive devil music. So when my Christian friends pointed out the lyrics in Sunday, Bloody Sunday, that went, the real battle just begun to claim the victory Jesus won, my eyes just opened up and I was ecstatic. I was a fan. This almost became a hymn for me. I became a fan. I even had a chance to meet Bono and get a signature. But fast forward 17 years. I'm living in Jerusalem at the start of our Al-Aqsa uprising in September 2000. General Ariel Sharon wanted to demonstrate Israel's sovereignty over the Temple Mount, so he brought hundreds of Israeli riot police with them to show that. And depending on which side you hear, either it was a concerted conspiracy by the Palestinians to use the occasion to start a riot, or the unrest was a product of spontaneous action rising out of frustration. But the underlying premise was very, very clear. The Israelis were claiming their rights to that land and that Temple Mount based on the Bible, and the Palestinians were claiming that it was the third most holiest site for the Muslims. There are multiple dimensions of this conflict, but the core element was religious. And the unrest lasted from September 29, 2000 to April 30th, 2008, claiming 4,789 Palestinians and 1,053 Israelis. What was it like living through it? People at the time were kind of living through a dark, dense fog, living from day to day, not knowing what exactly happened, and not knowing what was happening. Most of us had to keep a healthy distance away from the reality of violence. It was our defense mechanism. Because normal for us was not taking the bus because there were daily bombings. Normal for us was looking out of our apartment window and seeing the bomb squad arrive with their little robots blowing up suspicious objects that was on the street. Normal was always being suspicious and being wary. And because the conflict had this multi-dimension of religion, race, social, and geopolitical dimensions to it, it was way too big for us to even comprehend how we got caught up in this mess. So my family moved on October of 2006, and I'm happy to say we've been here since then, and we love it. But for myself, there was always this nagging sense that there was some unfinished business. And I have to admit, living through the turbulent times, my faith was definitely shaken. But about a year ago, I should have brought the book. Can you give me About a year ago, I was waiting for my daughters in the library, and I usually browse through new book section, and there was this book like this. You can see it later, but it has a horrendous cover, and I just looked away from it. But my eyes kept darting back. So I took a hard look at it and read the title, "What do you buy the children of the terrorist who tried to kill your wife?" What a tasteless title. I had a little PTSD moment at the time. Well, I was there at the library again the following week, and the book was still there. And it took about 3 or 4 weeks for me to finally crack it open to see what was this dang horrendous book was about. And to my utter surprise, it was about the Hebrew University bombing on July 31st, 2002. And that incident was a very close call for our family. My wife was 6 months pregnant with our firstborn, Christine. And on that day, my wife and I were going to have a date to eat at what's called Frank Sinatra Cafeteria on Hebrew University campus. But it was an unbearably hot day. I came home from the university to pick up my wife. And because the heat was so oppressive, we could not pick ourselves up from the chairs that we were sitting on. We just kept telling each other, "Hey, honey, let's go." She would say, "Yeah, let's do this. This is our date." But we just couldn't get up. But about 15 minutes later, we heard sirens going off. Then my phone rang, and the TV interrupted with a special announcement that there was a bombing at Hebrew University at Frank Sinatra Cafeteria. The attack killed 9 students and injured about 100 people. 3 of our friends were injured, so my wife and I were busy helping them go through the healing process afterwards. But in terms of knowing the details of the bombing, I wasn't too keen on keeping up. I had to keep a healthy distance from it to keep my sanity. Well, this book was able to help me process that experience because it was been 18 years. And the book was written by a husband of one of the victims who were not killed but injured on that day. Even though he was not physically affected, he showed many signs of PTSD. Through therapy, he was told to find out more details about the bombing because he was going through a lot of guilt. He was telling himself, "What if I did this? My wife wouldn't have done that." So the therapist said, "You know what you need to do? You need to deflect that guilt off of yourself and put it on the person who created this. Learn more about the terrorist." But the funny thing happened to him too. Through his research, he finds out more about the circumstances that led to the terror and the man who planted the bomb. And through this journey, into one of the most darkest moment of his life, the simple narratives that he held in his mind started to break down. The view that the Jews were against the Palestinians and the Palestinians were out to get the Israelis, those things started to go away. He discovers that the Palestinians were not out to get the Jews, but they have legitimate rights to the land as much as his people had to the land. And somehow, due to twists in history, they found themselves pitted against one another. So he decides to meet the terrorist who almost killed his wife. The man's name is Mohammed Odeh. And the author uses all this means. He writes to the Israeli government and to the prisons, to all these things. He tries to meet them, but he's not allowed. Instead, the closest that he gets to the terrorists was when he was allowed to meet the family of Muhammad. And the title of the book comes from when he was picking out presents when he was going to meet the children of the terrorists who tried to kill his wife. Well, going back to the band U2 and the album War, the album ends with this song called 40. And the number 40 refers to the psalm that we read today, Psalm 40. And the lyric only echoes the first 3 verses that we read of the Psalms. In the 80s, at the time, as teens, we thought, oh, U2 is all again, they're telling us about their faith. But there was more to that song. What people have discovered is that the band tries to talk about all the elements of the song: the hope, the terror, the disappointment, the ambiguity, the anger, the heartbreak. But the band places this last song at the end to say, life for us in Northern Ireland had been hellish, painful, and questioning. But through it, we have come to a place of hope and confidence in God. The lyric goes like this: God lifted me out of the pit, out of the mire and clay. He set my feet upon a rock and made my footsteps firm. I will sing a new song. For the author of the book, the pit of mire and clay was his hatred for the Palestinians. His willingness to buy into simple narratives, us versus them. But now through his journey of reconciliation, he's standing on the firm ground of understanding, empathy, and forgiveness. Even though he had to journey through this painful valley, he's in a better place right now. And the book doesn't really say it, but I think he wrote it to bridge 2 people, to be a resource of reconciliation and mutual respect for this ongoing war that we see in the Middle East. For me, I found out last Thursday when I read the end of it that the terrorist he first planted the bomb 3 days before July 31st. But what happened was that the bomb didn't go off. So he planted on July 31st. 3 days before July 31st, I was sitting in Frank Sinatra cafeteria, because that's where I ate 99.9% of the time in that time. How do I process that when I listened it from last Thursday? I don't know. But I do want to remind us, is that the people of God, the writers of Psalm, the writers of this book, the band U2 is telling us, is witnessing us, that we go through painful times. We go through times that we cannot understand, why is this happening to me? Martin Luther said this. He said, when he was asked about all the troubles he's going through, he said, but I know, but somehow, that only when it's dark enough, you could see the stars. God is leading us through the miry clay, but he's going to lift us up upon a rock, standing, and we will sing a new song. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.